Welcome to Talent Unfiltered. Located at the intersection of innovation and all things talent. Talent Unfiltered is presented by HireWorks. HireWorks, talent forward. And by Aon. Aon, empower results. Now, here is your host, Ron Gauthier.
It's Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. Hello, everybody, and welcome to Talent Unfiltered, presented by HireWorks and by Aon. I am Ron Gauthier, coming to you from Chicago. You, on the other hand, are looking at Washington, D.C., and that just happens to be the home of our guest today, Mike Heil. Mike is an associate partner at Aon, and he leads a team focused on helping to bring trust of law enforcement and the officers who work in those agencies back to the communities they serve across the country by utilizing really unique assessments that help identify and eliminate bias and brutality. Now, I hope that you had a great Labor Day weekend. I hope that you were able to get a little bit of a rest. There is so much tension and so much stress in our society today, whether you're talking about COVID, whether you're talking about protests, violent clashes between opposing groups. There's just a lot going on, and it really taxes people. With that in mind, I want to be aware that what we're going to talk about today is a really charged topic for a lot of people. And I want to make it clear on the front end, my goal here is not to completely solve the problem. My goal is not to offer solutions that are based on my perspective, because I don't think my perspective matters in this. What my goal is to show you that companies like Aon are trying to forge a path forward towards social justice for all, and that companies are truly trying to be responsible in many cases about how they are addressing these issues, not only in their own internal ecosystems, but how they're helping communities address these situations. So a couple of things before we bring Mike in. First, going forward, Talent Unfiltered will produce one episode per month. And this is due in large part to some new projects that I have going on that are going to require a bunch of my time. I don't want to ever abandon this, and we may go back to a situation where we are doing weekly shows. But for right now, at least for the balance of this year, we're going to do one show per month. And for those of you who follow the show, I truly appreciate it. I hope that this change doesn't change your desire to stick with us through the balance of the year. Now, before we bring Mike in, I want to remind you that you can connect with the show on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. The show is available on Spotify, on Buzzsprout, and on SoundCloud, and there is a video version, which some of you are watching right now on YouTube. All you need to do is go to any one of those platforms, search Talent Unfiltered, and you will find us. You can also email the show if you like at showinfo@talentunfiltered.com. The description to all of our social media platforms and the email are in the description section down below, and we hope that you connect with us. Now, if you like what we do, then like, subscribe, and share on your platform of choice, and don't forget to turn on the notification buttons so you never miss any new content from us. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Mike Heil joins us today. Mike is an associate partner with Aon. He leads and works in the Assessment Solutions Group. He and his team are working on assessment programs for law enforcement teams with the goal of eliminating bias and brutality, as well as mitigating risk for all involved. And he joins us here on Talent Unfiltered. Hey, Mike, thanks so much for taking time to join us here today, man. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you, Ron. It's a pleasure to be here today with you. So
Yeah,
thank you.
I'm looking forward to this for a lot of reasons. In our practice at HireWorks, we do assessments, not at the same kind of assessments that you guys do, but we're generally assessing for job fit. We're assessing for work styles and behavior, and trying to help people through assessments and through data-driven or through people data, I guess is the better way to say that,
Mhm.
to make better hiring decisions, give people paths to do more things and work that is truly suited to them. What interests me about this is I know a number of people in the assessments area. Marinus Van Driel is someone I've gotten to know pretty well. And Ernie Paskey. And the work that you guys do and the things that you're able to do and the insights that you're able to bring through the assessment programs that you do are just fascinating to me. And given everything that's going on in the world today, using an approach like this to address mistrust, to address bias, to address brutality in law enforcement, or perceived brutality, depending on which side of the aisle or which side of the discussion you rest on, is really fascinating to me. So, real quickly, before we get started, before we kind of dive into the meat of this, walk people through, a little bit about who you are and what you do with the Aon Assessments team.
Okay, yeah, great, thank you. So I'm an associate partner at Aon. My background is industrial organizational psychology. My entire career has been devoted to assessment, development, validation, implementation, and assessment for a number of different reasons, for selecting, for developmental purposes, feedback, and so on. So I am part of Aon Assessment Solutions, actually I work with Ernie and Marinus, people you just mentioned.
Mhm.
We are a global company and we have clients both private sector and public sector.
And I think people sometimes just don't understand how big Aon actually is, right? It's like, I think I
Yeah,
heard you mention it's like 50,000 colleagues, something along that line.
correct.
And in talking to Marinas and some of the other folks that I know over there, I know that COVID has really changed you guys' work style, how you've done things. And it's really nice for me to see a large organization like that all kind of come together around a path forward that allows them to not only navigate this time, but also find some real positives and some real things that they can do to add to society in a really, really, I think, important way. Which brings me to what we're talking about today. The title of this episode is Assessing Safety, and it's really about how we break through the barriers of bias, brutality, whether that's real or perceived, and how Aon is taking a kind of a leading role in helping law enforcement agencies find ways to earn the trust back in the communities that they serve. So I want to jump right into it.
Okay.
You and I talked about this. Our nation is super polarized right now. There are incredibly strong beliefs on both sides of this argument, on both sides of this situation. And regardless of where you are, ultimately, I think there is a desire to try to de escalate things. But in order to do that, you have to understand who's capable of it and how they do those things and how they think and how they process information. And it's a very muddy, murky, uh, um, perhaps controversial in some ways
Yeah.
approach. And I'd like to know from you, what was it that Aon, what was the thought process that you guys went through to say, you know what, these are troubled waters, but we think we can make a difference and we're gonna wade into them. I'd love to hear more about that.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So as you mentioned, Aon has 50,000 colleagues. We're a global company, and these colleagues are doing great work in their various communities. And also being data driven, and has a lot of insights into what makes for effective performance. So when we look at what's happening now with law enforcement in the communities, we look at that and we ask, what can we do to be able to help in terms of a risk management perspective?
Mhm.
And so what can we do to bring Aon's full weight behind this effort and be able to make a contribution to the communities and and have an impact, hopefully, on on people's lives.
Mhm. Yeah, it's such a I don't know how to say that. I can't remember a time in my life where I was actually alive and aware of what was going on when things looked like this. I can remember
Yeah.
times when we had unrest, the LA riots in '92. Um, and I can go back in history and I can look at 1968 as an example of a time when I think that there was this just this whole churning of society, and in so many cases it's about these civil upheavals, social upheavals are about disparities in
Yeah.
groups, or they're about mistreatment of certain segments of the population. Right now, racism and brutality are two of the areas that law enforcement, local, state, federal, right, are getting called out on. And in many cases, I think some of this is driven by it. And I know the documentation that you guys use when
Yeah.
talking about this program are driven by the fact that so many people in law enforcement don't look like the people in the communities that they're serving. And so right off the bat, there's a level of, I don't want to say distrust, but
Yeah.
there's a suspicion that goes along with it. What I want to understand is, how does Aon's assessment program help law enforcement organizations retool and kind of reshape their teams to address the challenge, and hopefully give these communities confidence that that they're being heard, I guess is the
Yeah.
right way to say it.
Yeah. So that's a very good question. And so when we talk about diversity, and we're talking about the community not reflect, or the I'm sorry, the law enforcement not reflecting the community, there is more even beyond the skin color, right? More beyond in terms of physical attributes, but in
Sure.
terms of the culture that we grew up in terms of the perspectives that we have, and how we learn to interact with other people. And so when we're talking about being able to have an impact on the law enforcement agency so that it does better reflect the community, one of the things that we're talking about is, first of all, looking at what are those basic elements of the culture that people grew up in, that they're familiar with. How are their behaviors impacting the community? So what we do is we look at something that we're calling community orientation,
Mhm.
right? In terms of how is the individual in law enforcement interacting with the community? Are they engaging with the community? Are they able to de-escalate situations? Are they able
Sure.
to earn the trust of the community? Are they sensitive to other people? So some empathy there, as well as sensitivity to themselves and how they're reacting in situations, so they can then make choices and make decisions to again, de-escalate and but choose the appropriate behaviors, hold themselves accountable as well as others, like their partners. And so that's one thing, right, is in terms of helping to rebuild the trust of the community by having the right people in the jobs, the right people for the role. Are we bringing in people, and do we have people in law enforcement who are able to engage with the community and who are able to have that orientation, which has a basis with trustworthiness. When we talk about trustworthiness, we're talking about being able to uh, have some empathy for people. So there's that empathy. There's also understanding rules and adhering to those rules.
Sure.
So there's that risk part that you were talking about. So there is the control of impulse control, and empathy are a foundation for trustworthiness. And so regardless of what side of the conversation someone may be on, what we're talking about is right people in the role, and that has a basis on having people in there who are trustworthy. Because people who are higher in trustworthiness also are less likely to engage in counterproductive work behaviors,
Sure.
which are the center of what we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's such an emotional kind of situation, right? And it's very easy, I think, for us to sit back and as white people and talk about
Yes.
this in kind of clinical terms, right?
Yes.
I think when you're living it, I think it's a whole different situation, and I think it's different. And I know I'm gonna. Pardon my French. I'm going to piss some people off by saying this, but it's different on both sides, right?
Yeah.
Um, I've always been of the belief that everybody has an opinion, and the truth resides somewhere in between those
Mhm.
opinions. And that's part of the reason why I like the data-driven approach, to be able to get to what actually is going on, and it's behavioral, right? It's
Right.
people who are not in the right place. In our organization, we're a talent solutions company, right? So we use things like talent optimization strategies to try to make sure that organizations are not only hiring people with the right skills, but whose work styles and thought patterns match the work that has to be done. That's
Yeah.
the primary focus for us. What we often find is that leadership is that is one of the really challenging parts of trying to correct behaviors or trying to create a different culture. Because if you use the analogy that we're going to create a different culture, we're going to create a culture of de-escalation, right?
Yeah.
The thought process still works. So here's my question for you guys: when you approach law enforcement organizations, it seems to me that there are some institutional things that happen, that have happened, that have they have operated a particular way for an extended period of time, probably and I don't want to make assumptions, but probably more so at the local level than at the state or federal level. I just assume that there could be some resistance. I could be way wrong, but I'd like you to talk me through how law enforcement organizations are responding to this idea of right sizing, right hiring, and getting people with proper behaviors in their organizations.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. So with the conversations that we have, honestly, the people we're talking to are those who've identified an issue that they want to work through, right? We're having conversations with them because they've identified that they want to address an issue, or they're trying to get ahead of the curve a little bit in terms of planning for the future. And when we're working with the leaders and talking about the issues involved, there is that commitment to having the right people in the role. And how we're defining that right role, the right person for the role, does go beyond the basic requirements, right? It goes beyond someone who has stress tolerance or commitment to the work, and does get to the community orientation aspect that I talked about.
Mhm.
And so that's something that, as we've worked with law enforcement agencies, that's a new emphasis that we've been placing lately in terms of the assessment. And when you talk about the leadership, right? So there's the culture, and the culture really is created by the people. It doesn't come out of the air, right? If there's
Sure.
a small startup firm that's created, they don't have a culture first, they create the culture. And so if the leaders, whether it be in the cities or within the departments, the law enforcement agencies, if they have a certain expectation for what the culture is. So here are the values of the organization, and then they might find that the culture that's actually operating might differ from that. And one way that they're able to do that, like with the assessment that I'm talking about here, not just for selecting people, but it could be used for people who are currently on the job. And these individuals can take it and they can get reports back to help them to be able to see some blind spots they may have, maybe some areas for development, and also some recommendations of what they can do that helps bring them in line with the expected culture of the
Sure.
organization. And the leaders can get a higher level report to be able to see, with no information about individuals, they'd be able to see where's their workforce falling.
Mhm.
Is there a police department or whatever the law enforcement agency may be, are they indeed representative of that culture that the leaders expect there to be? Because if they're not, right, then there's a problem that needs to be able to be addressed, and that kind of information is helpful in guiding them.
Yeah, let me, before we move on to the next thing, let me just ask you real quick.
Yeah.
Are you also assessing leadership? Because I think, at least from a corporate perspective, when we talk about assessments, we're actually, one of the things we focus on, as I mentioned earlier, is the leadership team, because so often what's communicated by them, the way that they communicate, their style of leadership can ultimately, regardless of what you do from a culture standpoint can
Yeah,
have such an impact on how people respond to what they think is expected of them, right?
yeah,
And so, are you
absolutely.
guys all actually taking this to leadership as well?
We are, but that's in the early stages, honestly. We are involved in assessing leaders. So some of our clients, some of our assessments are indeed directed toward those who are moving into leadership roles, promotions, and so on. But in terms of this aspect of it, this is something that is new that we're taking to
Okay. Okay. So let's jump back for a second. Let's talk a
them.
little bit about the community orientation piece
Yes.
of the assessment, because I think that's super important. Um, Given everything that is going on and all of the heat that is thrown off by rhetoric that
Yeah.
happens on both sides of this equation, I am 100% convinced that the ability to de-escalate a situation and to be able to have empathy to the
Yeah.
person on the other side of that conversation, on the other side of the law enforcement, portion of this equation, may be the most important thing. That ability to respond with kindness
Yeah.
are just they're as critical to solving the problem, I think, as the courage that is required by officers and law enforcement personnel to run into harm's way. Because I don't care what you say, the bulk of people are trying to do the right thing, right?
Yeah.
But there are people who throw themselves in the line of fire to protect us. But the situations that get out of hand negate all of that good work. So walk me through how organizations, how Aon's assessments are going to help people build that community orientation, build that empathy, that ability to de-escalate. And I guess what I'm really asking is, what are the training programs that go beyond that? What does that look like?
Okay. So what I'd like to do is start with the assessment part first, and then move into the
Sure,
training, if that's okay.
sure.
So with the
This is your thing, man. I'm just asking questions. So you're the expert. So you
all
take me
right,
where you want to go. It's all
all
good.
right. Thank you. So when we are talking about being data driven, which we've mentioned a few times, the data shows us that there are indeed elements, behaviors that are tied to success in different roles, regardless of what the job is, that there are different behaviors that are tied to success. And there are matches, right? Some people are better suited for certain jobs based on their work styles, based on the way they approach work, based on the way that they approach other people when they're working with them.
Hmm.
And so when we're talking about our assessment, one of the things that we have is a computer adaptive work styles assessment that looks at 15 different aspects of preferences and work styles to be able to see what is someone's tendencies, how do they prefer to do things. Because when we have a natural way of doing it, so we talk about community orientation, I already mentioned about having some empathy, being sensitive to others, we talked about being able to de-escalate, being able to make good decisions, and so on. If I'm somebody, I'll use empathy as an example. If I'm someone who doesn't really necessarily have a lot of empathy, and if I don't know that, then I'm only probably going to learn when someone gives me feedback.
Sure.
And if I'm in a role where it's not required a great deal, and there's so many other aspects of the job that I'm very successful with, and then the empathy part comes up only a little bit, maybe it's not being addressed, but then a situation may happen where I'm under a great deal of stress, and then the fact that I'm not, or am facing a challenging situation where empathy is required, but I don't have it and I haven't had any insight into that, then I'm going to really run into a lot of trouble. So by being able to see where somebody might fall along that continuum, again, I'll just keep using empathy as an example. If I learn that I really need to be able to show more empathy in situations, just having that feedback helps me to be able to do something about it. I have the awareness, And then what I'm learning, and that's where some training comes in, is the training being tailored specifically for whatever that aspect is that's needed for successful performance that is missing, where there's a gap.
Mhm.
So with empathy, maybe I'm learning that I need to take more time to listen to people. I need to actively try to put myself in the position of the other person, and different steps where I need to make an effort. And that's an important thing, because if I'm making an effort to do it, that can be draining, right? So it can be really tiring. All right, I'm now gonna show you empathy, but I'm working at it and it's tiring me out. And then I know that after the situation, I need to have a little rest, recharge my batteries a bit. But also, I'm learning strategies. I'm not saying someone's going to be faking empathy, right?
Mhm.
But what I'm saying is that someone needs to be able to stretch out of their comfort zone, in being able to listen to people, being able to think about someone else's feelings. 'Cause It, it may be uncomfortable for people to think
Sure.
about the feelings of others. And if they tune into that and know they need to tune into it, then that can help them. And then when things get really stressful and I might revert back to my normal way of being, if I already have strategies in place, I can maintain at least enough of that empathy to be able to help guide my choices.
Sure.
Now, again, the empathy was just an example, but
Mhm.
that's how it ties in with all the different aspects that are important for success.
Sure. And that makes a lot of sense. I think, there's always the risk of sounding like, um, to people who are affected by this, like we're to coin an old phrase, like we're putting lipstick
Yeah.
on a pig, right? And I don't
Yes.
I don't mean that in a derogatory way to law enforcement, but I think that it could be interpreted as we're glossing over one of the key aspects, and that is, if you listen to people, at least as a layman, um, being able to root out those folks who do not fit the profile required for proper police work, who um, maybe don't have that capacity for the level of empathy that is required. And just in kind of a short answer here, it does, because we're going to be up against time before long. It does the assessment give you the ability to do that? Do you have the ability to go, yeah, man, you're not the right fit, right? There may be a place for you in the police department, but it's not here.
So it does give enough information to be able to determine whether or not someone is the right fit. And you're right about their different roles, right? And it would be, if there was a profile that shows that somebody is high risk, then the agency has the choice as to what they're going to do with that. And it could be putting the person through some trainings. It could be moving them to a different role. It could be further evaluation of the individual to see, here's a flag. Let's look a little further and see if this is a concern or not, so that we are heading off any problems ahead of time, rather than facing some of the things that we're already seeing
Sure.
happening now.
Yeah.
And
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Go ahead.
no, I'm sorry, I was going to say, so that could be from the perspective of individuals currently on the job. When bringing people on, it could be that you're only bringing people on who meet that profile, right?
Mhm.
Then you're choosing those who have the highest levels of the community orientation, which the flip side of it is the lowest probability of engaging in counterproductive work behaviors would be your pool that you would take in.
Mike, I'm really glad that you said that, because I do think it's very easy for us as Caucasian men, um, to be able to sit here and talk about this in a really clinical way. But this has real world impacts for people who live in these communities every day. And there's so much risk on both sides, right? People that are in these communities who are people of color feel like there's a risk when they go outside, for being profiled or being treated unfairly. And I think so often officers feel the same way, that they're misunderstood or they're treated unfairly. But when I think of Aon, I really think of mitigating risk, mitigating or eliminating risk. Um, and I also think that the process behind what you guys do with the assessments lends itself to that. You're actually mitigating risk for communities. Walk me through how communities have responded to this and how they see this being a part of that not only rebuilding of trust, but also that mitigation of exposure from situations of brutality or bias.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Because that's what we're talking about here, right? Is risk is such an important part because there's risk of mission failure if the wrong people are in the role.
Sure.
There's the risk to the community in terms of the disruption to the community, in terms of, as you were mentioning, different concerns that they have, even the fear about going out, the fear about contacting the police if there's any kind of need that they have. There's risk to the individuals in the community. We've seen that in terms of injuries, in terms of death. There's risk to the police department from there's loss of reputation, right? Loss of trust. There's also the risk to the communities and the municipalities in terms of, and the police department actually, in terms of lawsuits. So all the way around, by not having the right people in that role, having individuals in the role who are going to engage in the types of behaviors that we've been seeing and talking about,
Mhm.
puts everybody at risk. And so the advantage to everyone is to be able to take those steps necessary. You mentioned about people having different perspectives on this, right? And
Mhm.
so regardless of the perspective someone has, it, one common element here is who's doing the job. We need to have the right people doing the job, that people who are going to help the police department, whatever the law enforcement agency is, meet their objectives, be able to accomplish their mission, be able to not just enforce the law, but also to be able to protect people and protect people in the community, but also to be able to mitigate all that for the community, so that what can happen is that starts to rebuild the trust in the community members. What they're able to do is that if they see the law enforcement agencies taking steps, then that starts to rebuild some trust for them as more people come into the law enforcement agencies who are engaging with the community in the way that we've been talking about. That helps to build more trust. And there's a lot of difficulty that police and other law enforcement agencies have in recruiting people,
Mhm.
especially in those communities where there's a disparity in the makeup of the police department versus the community. If if I'm a person of color and facing what's going on right now, I would not want to be a member of the police department, right? I would
Sure.
not want my child to be
Right.
a member of it. But if trust builds, then more individuals who are right now reluctant to view that as a career start to build that trust, then start to look at it as an option. And they would be more willing to apply and get involved. And if they do that, then that just helps to increase the diversity in the workforce. And it just creates a cycle where over time that trust can be rebuilt, and it's a be a win for everybody.
Yeah. So often I think we gloss over things, right? Um, we all like to see someone or deal with people who understand where we're at, who can empathize with who we are. We also like to see people, and it's part of it's actually natural and also part of the problem is that we feel more comfortable and we're kind of wired when something looks like us, behaves like us, whatever the case may be, right?
Yeah.
We're kind of wired as human beings to think that way. We're taught to recognize differences in our environment, whether that's people or activity or whatever. And I applaud Aon for doing this because I think that so often corporate America just they're they get a reputation of just being driven by profit. And I do want to be, clear. There's you guys do make money, right?
Yes,
By doing these things, but the
correct.
idea behind it is to hopefully build a better environment for everybody that's involved. And I really, for those of you watching out there, I'm sure we didn't cover this as deeply as you guys would like. And I'm sure that there are things that we left unsaid. But it's sometimes very difficult to have a conversation like this when you don't actually come from the perspective of the person who's feeling put upon or oppressed or
Mm.
whatever, whatever the case may be. Mike, thanks so much, man. I really appreciate you taking time with us today. I learned a lot, and I hope that we can do this again at some point.
Yeah, that would be terrific. Thank you
All right.
so much for the opportunity.
No problem, my friend. Everybody, Mike Heil from Aon. All right, that's going to do it for us today. I really appreciate Mike taking time to join the show here today. I also want to thank him and the team at Aon for helping make this episode happen. I'm not sure that we could have had a more socially relevant conversation than the one that we did today. I also hope that you have a couple of takeaways from this. First, that there are organizations like Aon out there trying to help find and forge a path towards social justice for those that need it most. Secondly, I hope that you maybe got some idea of the power of assessments. When you can analyze and quantify strengths and traits of the people in your organizations, you can not only help them work better, but point them toward the work that they were absolutely meant to do. Now, if you like what we did here today and you want to stay up to date, then like, subscribe, and share on your platform of choice. Turn on the notification buttons so you never miss any new content from us. Until next time, stay safe and don't forget to vote.